Black Hollow Manor was not just an abandoned building. It was a vessel of a darkness so deep and consuming that anyone who stepped inside could feel it pressing against their very soul. The air within the mansion was thick and heavy, almost alive, carrying a sense of anticipation as if it were waiting for intruders to make a mistake. Even before entering, the friends could sense the malevolence emanating from the crumbling structure, a presence that was patient yet intensely aware of every movement, every whisper. The house seemed to feed off fear itself, amplifying the smallest anxieties into overwhelming dread. Once inside, shadows shifted unnaturally. Walls groaned with the weight of memories long past, and the faintest sound of footsteps echoed like a warning. The darkness within the manor was not merely the absence of light, it was a tangible force, curling around them, constricting their thoughts, making every decision feel like a risk, every glance into the unknown a potential trap. In the corners, where light failed to reach, shapes moved that defied logic, elongated figures and faceless silhouettes that watched silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The very air seemed to whisper secrets that weren't meant to be known, twisting their perception of reality and pulling them deeper into the manor's sinister grip. As the friends explored, it became clear that the house had a memory, an awareness of those who dared enter, and it used that knowledge to manipulate the environment, to isolate and terrify. Hallways stretched impossibly. Doors led back to rooms they thought they had left, and every sound of creak, every scratch felt purposeful, calculated, a part of the manor's relentless strategy to dominate the minds of those inside. The darkness was not just surrounding them, it was inside them, seeping into their thoughts, preying on their fears, and ensuring that each step forward only drew them deeper into its unyielding grasp. The mansion's environment seemed alive, almost sentient, as if it had a consciousness of its own that constantly observed and reacted to every movement of its visitors. Hallways stretched and twisted in impossible ways, defying any sense of logic or spatial reality, making it nearly impossible for anyone to find a clear path. Rooms that appeared empty, at first glance, revealed hidden corners and shadows that seemed to shift when unobserved, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Doors led not where they should, but back into familiar spaces, creating a dizzying loop that disoriented and unnerved anyone inside. Even the air carried a weight, thick with the scent of decay, damp wood, and something far more sinister that made each breath feel like inhaling a part of the house. Isamar Vodens. Light behaved strangely within the mansion. Flashlights flickered, candles sputtered, and shadows elongated unnaturally, stretching across the floors and walls in ways that suggested a life of their own. The environment seemed to respond to fear, amplifying it, making each small sound a creaking floorboard, a gust of wind, the scuttling of unseen creatures feel monumental. It became apparent that the house remembered those who entered, using its architecture as a weapon to disorient and manipulate. Stairs shifted subtly, so a step taken in confidence could suddenly drop into darkness, and mirrors reflected not the present, but distorted images of past terrors, as if showing glimpses of the fate that awaited. Even the silence was purposeful. Moments of stillness carried an oppressive weight, and in those quiet instants, visitors could almost hear whispers threaded into the walls, teasing their minds. The environment itself felt predatory, feeding on hesitation and doubt, turning every instinct to flee into confusion, every glance around into suspicion, and ensuring that the mansion maintained complete control over both their physical movements and psychological state. The walls of Black Hollow Manor were adorned with portraits and symbols that conveyed a history far darker than anyone could have imagined. The paintings were not mere decorations. They were windows into twisted versions of reality, depicting families and individuals with distorted, almost melting faces frozen in expressions of terror and agony. Their eyes seemed to follow every movement, watching the intruders as though the figures themselves were alive and aware, silently judging or perhaps even anticipating their next move. The ritual symbols etched into the floors and hidden in shadowed corners spoke of ancient practices, of forces invoked long ago with intentions that defied human comprehension. Each mark seemed purposeful, as if placed to guide or trap those who dared to trespass, combining artistry with malevolence. The mansion-esque decor carried a psychological weight, influencing thoughts and emotions, making even the bravest feel exposed and vulnerable. As the friends explored, they realized that the portraits changed subtly when unobserved, showing new signs of suffering or eyes that glimmered with an unnatural light. The symbols, when studied closely, seemed to pulse faintly, almost as if alive, feeding off the fear and presence of anyone near them. Even furniture and objects, old and decayed, appeared strategically positioned as if part of a larger, incomprehensible plan to disorient and control. The walls themselves seemed to whisper, recounting fragments of rituals, warnings, and curses, echoing through the halls in ways that distorted sound and perception. This constant visual and psychological assault created a sense of inevitability, an understanding that the manor's past was inescapable and that anyone who entered became a part of its ongoing story. A story of darkness, suffering, and the lingering presence of supernatural forces that could not be reasoned with or ignored. The portraits and symbols were not passive, they were active participants in the unfolding horror, shaping reality and the very minds of those who dared to intrude. The shadows within Black Hollow Manor were not ordinary. They carried a malevolent presence that seemed to move with intent and awareness as Emma and her friends navigated the dark corridors. The shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching along walls and floors in ways that defied any natural source of light. They pooled in corners, shifting and writhing as though alive, sometimes forming vague humanoid shapes, other times morphing into grotesque, faceless figures that only the corner of the eye could detect. There were moments when the shadows appeared to detach from the walls, creeping toward the intruders with silent patience, their movements deliberate, testing boundaries, probing reactions. The woman who emerged from the darkness was an extension of this haunting phenomena, her pale skin and black, empty eyes blending seamlessly with the surrounding shadows, making it impossible to tell where the darkness ended and she began. Her unnaturally wide smile, split across her face, conveyed a cruel awareness, as if she had been waiting for them to arrive, fully aware of their deepest fears. Every step the friends took caused the shadows to react, contracting and expanding, as if measuring fear feeding on the tension that radiated from the group. Even when a friend turned to flee, the shadows seemed to anticipate their movements, curling along the floors and walls in silent pursuit. Appearing in places where there should have been nothing, sounds were distorted by the darkness. A soft whisper could swell into a roar, and footsteps that seemed behind them would suddenly appear ahead, or vanish entirely, leaving only the oppressive weight of unseen presence. The shadows exploited every weakness, magnifying the intruder's paranoia, making it nearly impossible to trust one another or even their own senses. Emma could feel the darkness pressing against her thoughts, infiltrating her mind with visions of despair and isolation. The faceless woman moved with a predatory patience, gliding silently through the blackness, never rushing, never leaving, yet always present. Her presence blurred the lines between reality and nightmare, turning simple hallways and staircases into traps designed to break resolve and shred courage. Even moments of apparent stillness were a lie. The shadows continued to shift imperceptibly, waiting for the perfect instant to close in, creating a constant, almost unbearable tension. The interplay between the faceless figure and the living shadows made every corner of the mansion unpredictable, transforming familiar spaces into arenas of psychological terror where instinct and perception were unreliable and fear was the only certainty. That the true horror of Black Hollow Manor was that the evil within did not remain confined to its decaying walls. The darkness, the shadows, and the malevolent presence had a way of escaping, of extending itself beyond the physical boundaries of the mansion and seeping into the world outside. Emma felt it the moment she awoke at dawn, lying on the damp earth. Just beyond the crumbling threshold, the sky was pale, the morning calm, yet a cold weight pressed against her chest, a lingering sense that something unseen was still watching, following her every movement. The whispers that had tormented her inside the house did not end at the threshold. They traveled with her, threaded invisibly through the wind, carried on the faintest sounds of the world, seeping into quiet rooms and empty streets. Objects she touched felt heavier, charged with an unnatural energy, and even familiar spaces seemed subtly warped, as if the manor's influence had expanded its reach. The book she held, soaked in black ink, was a tangible link between the house and her life, pulsing faintly with the memories and rituals performed within its walls, a conduit for the lingering malevolence that refused to release its grasp. Each night, shadows in her room seemed to curl in unnatural ways, shifting with intent, waiting for the right moment to strike or remind her of their presence. Even her reflection in mirrors appeared subtly altered, a cruel reminder that the faceless woman and the darkness were no longer contained, and that her reality was being infiltrated. Emma could hear the faintest of whispers through the walls of her home, calling her, probing her thoughts, testing her vigilance, and each sound carried with it the cold inevitability of the mansion's memory. The evil's reach was persistent, patient, and cunning, exploiting every moment of distraction, every lapse of courage, and every shred of fear. It was as though the house had implanted itself inside her consciousness, a parasite of dread that grew stronger with each passing hour. Friends she once trusted seemed distant, and familiar locations felt unfamiliar, tainted by the unseen tendrils of the darkness that had followed her. Even when outside, in daylight, she could sense the shadows shifting at the edges of vision. The air thick with anticipation and a suffocating reminder that the evil was not just a place, it was a force that could follow, observe, and manipulate from beyond the manor's walls, intent on claiming its victims wherever they tried to flee.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.